once again, we are sitting here at a beautiful Purple Valley Yoga Center in the month of December, 1st December today. My name is Carolina and I'm here with Kia Naddermier. We have been discussing different ways of pronouncing her last name today. So finally, I got it right. So Kia is here at the retreat center for the second time. She came for the first time last year, together with Scott Johnson. Last year, Kia came for 1 week only. And because you also got a little cold last year, we never managed to make an interview with you. So this year, finally, we are sitting here in front of the cameras. And I'm going to ask Kia some few questions. Kia, so what about your background?
Background in terms of...
In terms of how did you come to yoga? Family background, a little bit about work background.
Okay.
What made you come to the place where you are today, basically?
So I realized that I practiced Ashtanga yoga my entire adult life, almost. So I grew up in Stockholm, Sweden. I'm half British, half Swedish. And at the time, there wasn't really there was like some Shivananda yoga in Sweden at the time, but not really Ashtanga yoga or anything like that. And I was just starting out as a photographer. And my then boyfriend had just come back from Mysore, and he was like practicing with this weird like Darth Vader breath, the Surya Namaskar in our one-room apartment. And I didn't really know what he was doing. But anyway, I got an assignment to do a reportage about the alternative scene that was kind of budding in London. So in London, there was a lot of yoga, a lot of vegetarian restaurants and things like that. So he hooked me up with John Scott, who was teaching then like a little lead class in a studio in London. So I met with him and we did a photo shoot. And this was just like magic. I just felt this immediate connection to the practice. And then afterwards, he invited me and the journalist, Lisa Strömberg, to his class to practice. And again, it was something that I've never experienced before. It was just a little Ashtanga class, but I just realized that this is what I need to do. So when we came back to Stockholm, there wasn't really any Ashtanga around except my then boyfriend who was practicing in our apartment. So it took some time to kind of to find a teacher. Slowly, I met Maria Box, who was also here. She was then teaching Iyengar yoga in Stockholm, but my boyfriend said it's kind of similar to it has the same roots, so you're okay there. But I also started traveling to Crete. My sister had found a yoga place in Crete, turned out to be a practice place run by Radha and Derek, who turns out to be John's teachers as well. And then later on by Radha and Pierre. So we used to I spent, all of the summers there. And then also after like just a couple of years, I moved to Paris, but really working as a photographer. But I really had a daily practice from day one. Like what I got taught in that little class, I kind of nourished that and then slowly built on that. But it was very much a home practice and then slowly building it.
So that was 25 years ago.
Yeah.
Well,
makes me feel very old.
Yeah, time passes by quite fast.
Yes.
So then you moved to Paris.
Yes.
And today you live in Paris together with your family, with your husband and with your two girls as well. They're teenage girls now.
Yeah, so Uma is 19 and Devi is 14.
Okay. And you also have a shala.
Yes.
And I was reading this interview about you yesterday, actually. And there's this beautiful story about how you actually opened up the Mysore program in Mysore, not in Mysore, in Paris.
Yeah.
To tell us a little bit about that.
So, just to know a little bit about the story, I was never really interested in teaching, and it might sound a bit weird, but both my parents are teachers, and I saw how hard they were working and how unappreciated they were. And I was a fashion photographer, and I was very, very happy with that. But then something happened. My sister, she had cancer, which turned out to be terminal. And during that time of her illness, as a sibling, you can't really take the place of being the one who grieves really, because that's for the mother and her son. And, and I've always taken that role of trying to be the one who organizes and keeps quite strong during those times. But of course, it was like horrible time. But the only thing that kind of kept me going to find my own space was the practice. So I did the practice no matter what in the morning, and then I could be there for the others or my mom. And during this time, it's like your whole perception just changes. So what had been so important to me, I was so soaked in the creative world and the fashion business, and my husband is also a creative director, and we had moved to Paris, left everything to do this. So we were really in that, but it didn't make any sense. It was like everything fell away, and it was almost like a way of healing myself, was to give something back to that practice that had kind of saved me in a way. And this coincided with a few Ashtangis in Paris who felt that they really didn't have like a place where they could feel at home with their Mysore practice. So they had been asking me for quite some time, please, can you teach us? Can you just have a Mysore, maybe one morning or 2 mornings? Or so finally, at that moment, it felt like, okay, I kind of caved, and we started. So we opened up our apartment, basically. At the moment, we were living in quite a big apartment, so it was all right. And my very, very kind husband, supportive, he was like moving furnitures every morning to kind of make space for the practitioners. So in the beginning, I could just fit 12 in the living room. So there were 12 there, but then slowly, they started to move into also the hallway, and then into the office, and then in the kitchen. And then when they started moving into my bedroom as well, and I was walking around the apartment, Magnus was like, okay, Kia, maybe you should just consider moving the Mysore somewhere else. So I was away. All the students who were there were really like our own network. So they were really aware that I go away for shoots, and that takes priority, and that's my identity as a photographer still. And then I was away in Miami for 3 weeks on a shoot. And then actually my students found the Shambhala, which is a beautiful Buddhist temple. So, and they just felt like, okay, this is where we want to practice. So they set everything up, and they called me and said, you come home and you sign this contract. So the community kind of grew by itself.
Yeah, they basically did everything for you.
Yes,
they opened up.
It's as such, it's a really strong community, because they really wanted this, and it's beautiful, actually.
That's a beautiful story.
Yeah,
Really.
Yeah.
Is your husband also practicing?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, because then, of course, as we had kids, he's been practicing almost for as long as I have. So, and the kids have come with us everywhere. They have even lie on the floor here in this shala 15 years ago. Yes.
Yeah. So your family is also a quite important part of your life, of course, children and husband. So how has that been affecting the way that you have been teaching? Has it been influencing you as a teacher somehow?
Yes, I think that you have perhaps a little bit of a broader perspective. I personally think it's really important that teachers are really anchored in daily life, so that you can relate to what people do after practice. And perhaps particularly when you teach a daily, it's one thing when you teach in a retreat, you have all day to then lie and rest on a sunbed or do whatever. Or if you do a workshop, it's kind of, you don't have to follow up so much. But when you teach people every day, and who also have families and work life and so on, you have to create a practice which is sustainable and which is long term. And I think the situation with the children and with Magnus, it has really taught me that. And also that sometimes other things need to take priority, and that's okay.
So how did it change basically your practice? Because you started to practice, of course, you were not a mother then yet, 25 years ago.
Yes,
or you were already a mother?
No.
And then you and Magnus, you formed a family and you moved to Mysore. Then, of course, you were going through various kind of changing in your body when you got pregnant.
Yes.
So how has this been affecting your practice?
And this has also been really beautiful and really important to me, because also remembering that I was in the fashion industry before, where the body's looked at it's something that you look at, and it doesn't really matter how it works, if it's functional for you or not, but it's really an exterior. And the yoga, and very much Maria, who was one of the first women yoginis that I met, I really saw that there's another depth to the body, and that I was able to stop punishing myself so much and just override my signals. So the yoga has really been, in that way, an internal investigation in learning how to listen to your body. Oftentimes we tell our students that, okay, so that you have to listen to your body. But I really do believe that this is something that you have to learn over time, because we're so conditioned to override our signals. So you have to again step back, and the yoga, it's very much about learning to listen again.
Yeah, because the world that you were living in prior, you became a teacher with the photography and the fashion and design. It's a kind of materialistic world. It is. Basically, it is aiming, or it is looking very much at the outer appearance.
Yes, it is.
So when you started to practice, when your practice became a little bit deeper, when you went through the I don't want to say perhaps traumatizing experience when your sister died, did you kind of found that world a little bit shallow? So you kind of felt that you could not continue with that job?
Yeah, it was a shift, definitely. Yeah. I still must say that the creative process will always be within me. And at heart, I always look at myself as a photographer, in terms of, I don't see myself as a yoga teacher. And it's something that I've had to move into slowly. But I think also because I have such deep respect for what the word means to actually be a yoga teacher, that I feel like, I don't know if I will ever call myself properly a yoga teacher, but I teach what I know. But of course, the fashion industry, like I said, when you have a shift like that, it feels like I didn't find because as a fashion photographer, you have to be in Paris, you have to be 400% full on. And that, if you don't have that will anymore, it doesn't work. So there were other things that really took priority.
Yeah. Well, I think that you are a fantastic teacher. I love your presence in the shala, and your presence in the shala is extremely strong. I feel, and it's very, very inspiring. So I really enjoy it.
I think that maybe because it was never something that I aspired for, and it was kind of my community asking me to teach, I felt very free, because I felt from the moment I started that either I teach what I practice or I go back to being a photographer. It was never something that I had to hang on to or cling to. It was never a prestige for me to be a yoga teacher, or I wasn't supporting myself as a yoga teacher in the beginning. So there was a lot of elements that allowed me also the space to just do exactly how I wanted to do it, or not at all. And I don't think I had that liberty as a photographer. I was much more, so I don't think I was as good maybe as a photographer as I can be, as authentic, because I was trying to fit in more. I can be more authentic as a yoga teacher because I really don't care about those things anymore. I've learned my lesson with striving in terms of the fashion. So now that's not for me anymore.
So it's the truth that is coming out, basically.
I think so, yeah.
Your practice has always been a Mysore practice. So you have always been practicing Ashtanga in a Mysore style setting. And this is, of course, what you are teaching now also here at Purple Valley and also in your shala. Have you ever been traveling to Mysore?
Yes,
also?
I have, a couple of times.
Did you enjoy that experience? Has it been influencing you a lot as a teacher, you feel?
I enjoyed it. I waited though until the kids were a little bit bigger. So I had already many, many years of practice behind me when I went. And I did enjoy the fact of going back to where it all started. And of course it has, because When I started Ashtanga also 25 years ago, those teachers like Radha and so on, they really came directly from Mysore. So that was influencing me in the beginning a lot. And then from there, I grew into my own practice.
Yeah, because now I'm, of course, joining you in your Mysore room, and it is a wonderful practice. But I don't see you as this kind of, I don't want to say not traditional, but perhaps it's the wrong word. But I don't really see you as a super traditional Mysore teacher.
No.
Though you are teaching a Mysore style Ashtanga practice, but you have also developed it very much yourself.
Yeah.
So perhaps you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah.
Because you are breaking down the postures in very interesting ways, and you have a little bit of different approach to them also. Yeah.
So like I mentioned, when I started to share the practice, it was really a healing process, both for myself. And I think that has been the most important aspect of this practice for me, a practice to heal. The first yama, the first universal vow of yoga is ahimsa, non-harming. And I think that is for me like the, when you play cards, you have like a trump card. So this is the trump card. So it overrides any idea about what is traditional, what is the correct method. First of all, we always have to make sure that the practice is rooted in ahimsa, non-harming. So that is one thing that I always look for. So I don't try to fit people into postures, but I really look at the person and adjusting people, not adjusting postures, if you see what I mean. And trying also to make the practice relevant for the person where they are actually at. So not trying to make them fit into a system before that, if they ever will want to do that, but really try to meet them where they are. And then the more you dive into the subtleties of the practice in terms of the pranayama and the breath, it is impossible to practice postures without room for the breath. And room for the breath happens with alignment. So I think as an advanced pranayama practitioner, you would never see an advanced pranayama practitioner, or you may do, but practicing without alignment. Because without alignment, the breath can't move freely. And with alignment, I mean aligning with gravity, stira, stability, and then giving room, sukham, for the breath. So I think this, although I really respect the order of the practice and the count and all of the, I think the Ashtanga method is the most beautiful practice sequence and the most intelligent one. But what is important to understand, I think, is that it doesn't automatically heal. You have to practice it with a lot of mindfulness and intelligence in order for it to actually be yoga shikitsa, to be therapeutic. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Definitely, it makes sense. Talking about alignment, you're also using quite a lot of props with your students. What is your approach to props, basically? So how do you feel that they can help a student in the practice?
Yeah. First of all, I think it's a problematic with the word props.
Okay.
Because it kind of gives a signal that we are propping ourselves up like a support so we can do things that we normally wouldn't be doing, right? But this is the word we have now, so let's use it. But I put no value in if I use blocks, and so with very advanced students, so I look at the anatomy and what is most appropriate for this constitution. And this is where sometimes if you are in a pose and you are a person with very long legs and you're supposed to reach down to the floor and still have the midline at its maximum length, then for such a person with longer legs, it makes sense to come up a little bit with the hands so we stick under a block. And also being a home practitioner, it's quite difficult to feel exactly where you are and to teach yourself. So usually when I use blocks or straps, it doesn't make the posture easier, but it makes me kind of have to look at what I'm doing and then try to to kind of reinvent that, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. So do you find, have you been finding a lot of inspiration with any particular teachers when it comes to the use of blocks and belts and bolsters, or is it something that you have been experimenting with yourself?
I have been experimenting a lot myself, and I haven't, unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to study very much with Mati, but I think she was an incredible inspiration. Also in terms of like going her own way and always putting the practitioner first. So the little time I spent with her affected me a lot, like to get that from a woman. So with those things, I must say she's been a great inspiration, although unfortunately I'm not one of her like long-term students or anything like that.
Yeah, she was a huge inspiration.
Yes.
She left a lot.
Too soon, yeah.
Yeah, she did a lot for the yoga world, basically, for the practitioners.
Yeah,
definitely.
beautiful.
Yeah. So we have been talking about alignment and how the alignment is connected to the correct breathing in the postures. We have been doing a lot of breathing also in the classes, and we also start the classes with various kind of Kriyas. And one of the things, except for alignment, that you are working a lot with in the Mysore room is actually also Pranayama, breathing exercises. So you have been studying Pranayama for quite a long time now. Perhaps you would like to tell us a little bit about your Pranayama background.
Yeah. So my teacher is Sri O.P. Tiwari-ji. And lately I've also been studying with his son, Sudhir Tiwari. And I was very lucky because Tiwari, he doesn't travel as much now, he's older, but he has his most senior students in France. So we had it's a small Hatha yoga community that he has been going to for years and years and spending very long time with them. So I was lucky to meet him quite early on.
In France?
When he was coming and spending long periods of time with him and a lot of private sessions and things like that, really learning directly from him. And I think my first kind of rebirth was meeting with Ashtanga in terms of practice, but my second was meeting with Tiwari-ji.
And when was that? Sorry to interrupt.
So I was introduced to the Kavalyadam method. It was probably 10 years after I started practicing that I started with this Kavalyadam method. And then I met Sri O.P. Tiwari a little bit after that. So I was spending a lot of time with him, and now the last 3 years I've been going 3 to 4 times per year to Kavalyadam. And so he is the director of the ashram Kavalyadam in Lonavla in India, or he's the successor of Swami Kavalyananda, who founded this ashram. And if you want me to go in a little bit about the lineage.
I would love to hear a little bit about that.
So it's important to remember, so Swami Kavalyananda was kind of same time as Krishnamacharya. And we have to remember at that time, yoga was considered very auspicious. It was mainly practiced by men who were living in seclusion, right? And Krishnamacharya did an incredible work, and both aspired to bring yoga to the people, right? And Krishnamacharya actually went to Swami Kavalyananda. Swami Kavalyananda, his way of bringing yoga to the people was that, as we know, in Patanjali's time, the focus was really on the mental, like on gaining a meditative state of mind or reaching for a meditative state of mind. But then with the Hatha Yoga period came all these therapeutic aspects of the practice. So what was that he started scientific research around the therapeutic effects that the traditional texts like Hatha Pradipika, Granda Samahita, that they claim that these practices have. And that hadn't been done before. And he was incredibly open-minded in terms of that he didn't only see the practices as necessarily having only a spiritual goal. So when you read his books, he talks about 2 categories. So either you can practice as, he calls it, a physical culturist, and that's someone who's practicing for their health benefits. Or you can practice as a spiritual culturist, and that's with another aim. And then there are 2 different options depending on what you're actually looking to get out of your practice. So your own intention matters. So the Kavalyadam Institute have done incredible work in terms of scientific research, but the other foot is really in the tradition itself and the scriptures, and I study both of these when I'm there. So they've done work in terms of translating old manuscripts, etc., coming out with scriptures that hasn't been translated before, etc.
So just to interrupt you here,
Yeah.
so you say that when they are teaching pranayama at the institute, it's either from a health perspective or from a spiritual perspective.
Yeah.
So how do you teach your pranayama when you're teaching it to the student? Is it a mix, or is it a specific kind of pranayama sequences for beginners? Or
yes, so it depends. It depends. So we build it up very slowly. This has to do with the nervous system. So a lot of times, unfortunately, pranayama has had a little bit of a bad reputation because it's been taught perhaps by teachers who aren't really soaked in a tradition or in the practice itself. And oftentimes I've seen pranayama being taught into a big group, and the whole group, for example, is given a breath retention, kumbhaka, which the teacher counts the same for everyone. That would never be done in Kavalyadam because pranayama works primarily on the nervous system. And the breath is so closely connected to the nervous system. So as soon as we try to push our breath beyond its capacity, automatically the sympathetic nervous system kicks in. When that happens, the breath shortens. So as soon as you feel that you're a little bit out, this is a bit too long for me, your breath will shorten. So you will always start at your own capacity and building up very slowly. So you're getting, the first thing you would do would not be to introduce a breath retention, but it would be to lengthen the exhalation in order for the body to get used to the CO2 levels for longer. And then slowly, once you reach a certain level of that, plus your Kapalabhati, which is another very important Kriya, preparatory practice for pranayama, you will then slowly progress. So when I teach a group class, I sometimes give different, if I have very experienced students, and I will give different options to them to do compared to those who are new. And then as your practice progresses, it's just like in the Mysore room that not everyone practices the same sequence. So then we start to individualize the practice. So if you're regular with your practice, then I start to read the pulse. And if I advance your practice giving breath retentions, it's usually in a one-to-one setting. And it's done according to your Ayurvedic constitution, your intention with the practice, your breath capacity, your whole kind of, also a little bit what goes on if you're on any medication, if you're pregnant. So it's really a holistic way of looking at the person, and also an individual progression, not very far from how you would work in a Mysore room, really, actually.
It's really interesting.
And that's what I love about it.
Yes, this is why also you are taking the pulse, because this is what I saw. I saw this in the Shala in the beginning of the first week of yours and Scott's retreat, that you were taking pulse of some of the students, which are the more regular students, I assume.
Because this is me. I think it's, in order for me to prescribe you a practice, I find it helpful if you know what practices we're doing first, right? So you need to just learn so I can give you a practice. Otherwise, I'll give you a practice and you have no idea what to do.
No. So what do you, when you take the pulse of a student before you start to practice pranayama, what are you expecting to feel?
Yes.
What are you looking for?
Well, I'm not really expecting anything. No. I'm tuning in. And the pulse is the way I'm taught it is also very subjective. And so you work with the pulse, but you also work with like the Ayurvedic constitution as a whole. And you do an assessment with both pulse and a questionnaire, and also the way I know the student in general and their constitution. So it's like a whole. And the pulse perhaps being the most subtle thing. The pulse more tells you about what goes on at the moment, right? So from a questionnaire, you will get, but also from the pulse, but you will get a basic constitution, but then I can feel differences happening. The vata might have been going up, or the person might not have slept well, or whatever. And this can be felt in the pulse, and then I can adapt their program accordingly.
This is really interesting.
It is.
So you have been studying pranayama in Kavalyadam now for a couple of years then?
No, for many years, yeah.
And you have done a specific course also?
Yes, I was also in the first group of taking. So I was already certified by my teacher many years ago, but I think they have seen what happens with pranayama as it enters the West, that there are many distortions, and it's taught sometimes in a quite violent way, actually. So now I was lucky to be in the first group to go through their 3-year program.
So you came to Purple Valley after you finished the 3-year course at Kavalyadam, which was also including the Ayurvedic part?
Yes.
So you have also been studying Ayurveda for those years when you've been there?
Yes.
It's really, really interesting.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I studied, it's important to say, I'm not an Ayurvedic doctor at all, or an Ayurvedic therapist as such. I've been studying it in relationship to pranayama, right? So, but of course, all of this comes together.
Yes.
Yeah.
So do you feel that pranayama can be practiced by anyone, or do students need to have a firm asana practice before they start to do any form of breathing exercises? Because I remember that when I was studying with my teacher Rolf, when I started to practice Ashtanga, after a couple of years, 6-7 years I think it was actually, he started to introduce me to the Ashtanga pranayama. And basically, according to Rolf, we needed to have a firm, established asana practice to be able to do the Ashtanga pranayama. What is your take on all this?
So
is pranayama for everyone?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's my absolute conviction. But you have to start at the beginning. So it's very different how the pranayama is taught in the Ashtanga system than in the Kavalyadam lineage. I also just want to come back to say that Kavalyadam does not claim to have invented any particular style of pranayama. They're also not focused around the persona or a guru, but they really rely on the scriptures, on Hatha Pradipika, Granda Samhita, Shiva Samhita, Patanjali. So all the pranayamas and the techniques that I'm learning can be backed up with scriptural reference. So you wouldn't, in case there is a practice that has no scriptural reference, then that's very clear. Okay, so this is maybe a preparation that the teacher has come up with, or so we're not trying to create something that new at all in that sense. Now I kind of deviated. What was the question again?
Before we go back to the first question, so do they also do any form of modern research when it comes to the effects of pranayama?
Yes,
they do.
A lot.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is really, and around cancer patients, and it's a lot going on there. Yeah. So I really think that this is very important to know that pranayama can be practiced by anyone, because anyone who can breathe can practice yoga. Right? Otherwise, we would really be quite excluding people who have mobility issues, who maybe be at the end of their life, etc., from the yoga practice. And I don't find a yoga practice who cannot be there for me when my body is not cooperating anymore. That is not a practice that's really valuable. So I think it's really also important, also when we have a healthy body, but to also think about creating a practice that can be there for us. Always.
So that was the answer to the question, if the pranayama practice can be taught to anyone.
Yes.
Yeah. Coming back to the Ashtanga pranayama then, so what could you explain a little bit what the difference is between the, I don't want to say system of Kavalyadam, but the pranayamas that you have been learning in Kavalyadam and the Ashtanga pranayama? What is the difference between those two?
For the Ashtanga pranayama, that was something I only did the first 10 years of my yoga practice. And the way I was introduced was, once you reach third series, then you start doing pranayamas. And what happened was that, so then it was the situation with the teacher counting my breath and counting the breath retentions for me. And I fainted, I felt nauseous, I really I struggled with it so much. And I used to actually hate pranayama. It was like oh no, not pranayama. But I kind of, because I'm very stubborn, so I tried to stick with it anyway. But I found it a real struggle. And it turned out, which is true for many of us, I think, just, also I started yoga in my 20s. And, just because I could put my leg behind the head and I could do all these advanced postures didn't mean that, first of all, I had the understanding for what was going on in my system. But also, it turned out that my breath was very short. So the moment I met my teacher and I got permission to be with the breath that I actually had and to feel that breath, even though it was very small, was sacred, and I would cherish the breath that I had, then I could relax into the practice. And then it was like this, it was like a flower that opened. Because I think that hard approach for me really triggered the sympathetic nervous system, and it triggered all of these kind of conditionings of pushing myself and trying harder and it's not good enough. And so the whole pranayama experience had a lot of hardness and tension instead of kindness and compassion.
So the pranayama that you are teaching, that you are practicing, is a little bit of a softer kind.
Well, it's not so much. It's more that I allow people to find their own ratio. So we will start I will not tell you, Carolina, you have to have this amount of seconds of inhale and this is your exhale. But I allow you to take your time to find something that you can remain with stability and ease for a long period of time without feeling that you're thirsty for breath or that you tense up. And then, we back up a little bit. And usually actually what happens as soon as the other important thing is to find a posture that would actually accommodate the breath and that you pay attention to the breath. And what happens automatically almost once you settle that down is that the breath starts to open for you and it lengthens without you trying.
So is this where the alignment comes in?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So how can the pranayama support our Ashtanga practice? Or how can those two practices support each other, perhaps?
They are completely bound together in my view. So I would not I think yesterday you asked me how I learned about alignment, and it was the pranayama that taught me alignment. Because you sense when the breath is being strained, when you're not in the right place in terms of the midline, the central axis of your body, when you're out of your gravitational line, etc., and when the breath has no space. So then you start to make subtle changes into how you can come back into your subtle body and your breath.
You make me want to develop my pranayama practice, which has been coming and going
I think
and
this
coming.
Is an important. This is a really interesting subject, because I think what has happened a little bit is that since yoga entered the West, many people think of yoga as asanas.
Yes.
So when they think of, and that's okay, but what happens is that when I think about progression in yoga, I think about more asanas. But we have to remember that more asanas is that. It's more asanas. There are many aspects that aren't in the asanas to be found. If you want to progress or go further, deeper perhaps. Progress is not such a good word, but go deeper. It is not in more asanas. It is in coming to the next limb, pranayama.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you are in a Mysore room, do you see a lot of people that are not aligned with the breath? Would you say that majority are not aligned with the breath? And how do you approach that? Because sometimes we are struggling quite a lot.
Yeah.
And then I would say that we are definitely not aligned with our breathing.
Yeah.
So do you stop the students? Do you tell them to focus more on the breathing? Or how do you do?
I like to go in lightly, so I don't like to point out mistakes too much. So it's kind of I feel that the relationship in the Mysore room has to build over time. And it's not really up to me to push my ideas onto a student, but allow them to also first, they need to start to trust in the process and trust in our work together. And then, of course, I introduce slowly, little by little, things that will help them to open for the breath, because that will always be what I see first. It's like, as a photographer, as soon as I come into the room, the first thing I see is the light. It still is there. I see the light. When I go into the Mysore room, I see the breath.
Yeah.
It's very, very obvious to me where there's breath. And the other thing I think is oftentimes the breath is also compromised by the striving with the grasping, which we all have, to different degrees. And we just bring that with us onto the yoga mat. And that also, then it's important not to judge that as well, because then it becomes like the second arrow of judging the judging, you know. So it's important to treat that, okay, this is here, you know, and look at that with kindness and compassion.
Yeah. Another thing also that you have been introducing in the Mysore room in the mornings are the Kriyas. Perhaps you could talk a little bit about the Kriyas as well.
Yeah.
There have been many interesting practices when you have been around here.
Yeah. So again, the Kriyas, unfortunately, has kind of been forgotten since the yoga came to the West. I think there are not so, I mean, in comparison how many people teach asanas, how many teachers are qualified to teach Kriyas, it's not done so much, unfortunately, because Kriyas is kind of that's really the foundation of any practice. So first you kind of, it's the cleansing processes of Hatha Yoga. So there are 6 traditional Kriyas. So, and the text says really that before you start any practice, you first have to, purify the nadis and also, but it's also the physical process of kapha or phlegm clogging your internal channels and so on. So Kriyas are really like the base, the foundation for any yoga practice, to first clear out anything that might be blocking your process in order to actually do the practice. And they say that, for example, the Kriyas that we've been doing here is Uddiyana Bandha and Nauli and so on. And they are really for, in a physical sense, for digestion and elimination. And they're considered the most important Hatha practices. If you don't do anything else, you do your Naulis. And this is because constipation is considered the biggest obstacle for prana to flow freely. So depending on your constitution, I would suggest Kriyas that will help you according to what you need.
Have you been able to do that with all the students here on the retreat?
No, so for the ones who are coming a little bit further in their pranayama, and I give individual practices, there we start to introduce a little bit more specific Kriyas that will be directed to them. And when sometimes I go deeper, depending on the setting and the level of the practitioners.
Okay, yeah, interesting. Good. So one of the last questions then. So how has the pranayama changed your own personal practice when you are practicing now yourself? You still have a daily practice, of course. So what is your biggest focus?
It is the breath, of course.
Yeah,
it's kind of you're getting the same answer from me all the time. It's that, and also my practice is very long. My practice.
So how long is your pranayama practice then?
At the moment, it's 1.5 hours.
1.5 hour pranayama only?
Yeah.
Okay.
So then it takes some, but it doesn't, I want to say a pranayama practice can be 10 minutes. It really depends on where your focus is. And also, as people mature in their practice, with the risk of being a bit controversial, but it's not unlikely that the pranayama is allowed to take a little bit time of the asana practice. So the asana practice can shorten a bit to give more time for the pranayama as you advance in your practice.
Yeah, and this is what is happening with your asana practice, perhaps?
Well, it depends.
Or how many hours do you have in the night?
It depends. It really, I must say, it depends on the situation. Like here, it's very supported, so I have a lot of time. When I'm in the ashram, I have a lot of time. Sometimes I have to divide my practice. So I might do Kriyas and Pranayama before I teach the Mysore, and then I'll do a longer asana practice after I teach. So it hasn't so much shortened my asana practice, but it's given me a different focus.
So do you have any advice for someone that is starting a pranayama practice and how to basically embed it in the asana practice as well? How can you fit everything into a day?
So again, when I do personal pranayama practices, but also when I do a workshop like here, everyone that comes to the retreat in Purple Valley, they leave with a personal pranayama practice. And I always give 2 suggestions. So they have a longer practice that they can do on the days when they have a little bit more time, but they also have a shorter practice to leave with. And I can even shorten that further if that's necessary. So I think it's better to do like a 10-minute pranayama, and it will build from there. So I always give suggestions for shorter and longer practice.
Okay, good. So hopefully I can also develop my pranayama practice.
Yes, I look forward to that, Carolina.
I'm also looking forward to that. You're supposed to show me some exercises this evening after the class.
I will.
hopefully those exercises will improve my sleep.
Yes, I'm sure they will.
So yeah.
Yeah.
So Kia, anything that you would like to add?
No, I love it here.
Yeah.
That's the only thing.
Yeah, we have a fantastic place.
Yes.
So
it's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
thank you so very much.
Thank you,
Carolina.
much.
Thank you.
And I'm looking forward to next year when you will be coming back together with Scotland.
Thank you. Me too.
Yep.
Thanks.